Hello everyone, this is Melissa Lentz. I'm the Director of Education at OSEG, and I'd like to welcome you to our webcast today, during which we will discuss ISO 31000 versus COSO ERM, the Great Debate Part 2, taking the right level of the right risks for success. In the Great Debate, the panelists all agreed that decision-making is the heart of risk management. Decisions are how risks are taken. The focus of risk management should not be limited to avoiding harms, but instead enable informed decisions that lead organizations to achieve objectives. They also agreed that COSO 2017 update was an improvement on the 2004 version, but it does not provide sufficient guidance on decision-making and the need to balance the potentials for harm and reward. Since the first Great Debate, ISO has published the 2018 update to their Global Risk Management Standard. The panelists will share their thoughts on whether the latest edition provides the guidance on decision-making that we need. Finally, the panelists will debate whether using the word risk and risk management is actually leading practitioners, regulators, and other stakeholders astray. But before we begin, I'd like to go over just a minute to go over a few housekeeping notes. First, regarding continuing education credit. We provide NASBA-approved CPE credit to you if you have an OSEG All Access Pass, which you can purchase individually or as part of a company subscription. The All Access Pass includes many benefits in addition to CPE credit for webcasts, such as access to all OSEG resources and on-demand education series. So if you don't already have a pass, I would encourage you to check it out on the OSEG site. If you do have an All Access Pass and would like a certificate of completion for CPE for this event, please hour in to answer all the polls. These are requirements for receiving CPE credit for this event. Second, regarding the recording from this webinar. In a couple of days, we will have the recording of this event posted on the OSEG website. Just log into the site and then go to the Events tab and select this webcast. This recording may be viewed by anyone with an All Access Pass. Third, regarding upcoming events and activities. Please watch your email for announcements from OSEG about other upcoming webinars. You can view information about these upcoming webcasts on the OSEG site. So today we will describe the key concepts behind the new ISO 31000, now in final form, and COSO 2017 Enterprise Risk Management Frameworks, understand how decision-making is central to risk management, and understand how or if these frameworks address decision-making. So we are very pleased today to be joined by the following panelists. Tim Leeach, provocative COSO critic in the past, who has now publicly endorsed the new COSO 2017 ERM framework. Norman Marks, retired CAE and CRO and evangelist for Better Run Business, outspoken critic of the new COSO 2017. Recognized influencer in corporate governance, risk, and compliance, and also our host and moderator today. So before we hand things over to our panelists, we are going to offer our first poll. And again, please remember to answer the polls today if you're interested in receiving CPE credit for this event. So the first question is, do you have an OSEG All Access Pass, which is a paid membership, and would you like to receive CPE credit for this event? So please go ahead and answer this poll, and at this time I will hand things over to our panelists to begin the presentation today.
Thanks, Melissa, for the introduction. Also, your audio cut out, at least for me, and I wanted to make sure that everybody knew we also have on the line Alex Sidorenko, who is the CEO of Risk Academy, very outspoken on all kinds of topics regarding risk, has some of my favorite risk-oriented videos on YouTube, and he's obviously joining us as well, as you can see there in the photos. So just, kind of getting into this particular discussion, we framed it a little bit as a debate, probably not a formal debate. We don't have a particular, statement on the floor that we're debating for or against, but we do have a number of experts on the call here, and each of the experts does have, a point of view about these things. And as we get into the conversation, I wanted to, we haven't done this before, but we have, hundreds, eventually thousands of people will be participating in this webinar with the replay and whatnot. And first I'm kind of curious how many of you, and Melissa, if you can open up the next poll, how many of you have actually downloaded and read these various standards? So the two things we were talking about is ISO 31000, and then COSO ERM. Are you able to open those, Melissa, this poll? Melissa, are you able to open this poll?
Yeah, I'm working on getting it open right now, Scott.
Okay, thank you. So we want to find out how many of you have downloaded and read these particular standards. And then separate from this, which of the standards you prefer. Looks like we're having a little bit of delay with our polling technology here. So as those polls are being opened over the next few minutes, if you can just go ahead and take time to answer whether or not you've downloaded and read the standard, and then the poll after that is going to be which one of them you prefer. So first, getting into these standards, I just wanted to kind of kick this to, each of the presenters on the degree to which this notion of decision making has made its way into the standards. Again, part of the discussion last time was how central decision making was to risk management. And the question is, do either of these frameworks really help in this area? Thought I'd go ahead and kick this off, Norman, with you, if you could maybe address that question and give your take on the matter.
Sure. Thank you, Scott, and hello, everybody. The key to risk management, as we talked about last time, is really, let me put aside for a minute that word risk, the new four-letter word that can get in the way, and talk instead about what to me risk management means, which is understanding, appreciating, and doing something about what might happen. I think if you replace the word risk with what might happen, you're much more frequently going to get something that's useful. So if I take, first of all, the COSO ERM framework, it says it's there to help improve decision making, but I don't find in practice it does very much. The one area where I think it has some benefits, apart from saying that it should be included in decision making, is when it talks about defining your objective and strategy for achieving the objective, that you should then consider the things that might happen, that might flow from that strategy or objective, and what you need to monitor. And I think that's useful, because it is that top-down, objective-based look at what might happen and then being able to address it. But it still doesn't help you with the decisions that are made every single day. In the news just this last week or two, you've got Novartis and AT&T ending up, I think, firing two senior managers for making decisions that they hadn't really thought through in terms of what might happen if it came out in the newspapers that they had done what they did in terms of giving a whole bunch of money to this gentleman, Michael Cohen. So I think there's some value there, but it's disappointing, and especially since you've got all of this focus on still a list of risks, which is the risk profile. The ISO 31000 update was hugely disappointing to very many of us. One of the things that went on behind the scenes was that there was a large group of people, practitioners, who were trying to influence the standard to move towards decision making. Now, the previous edition of the standard had said that decision making was central and relied upon some kind of analysis of what might happen in order to make informed and intelligent decisions. Unfortunately, the update really just tweaked some of the language, and it didn't really get into some of the key points. One of the things that, for example, I know Scott and I and others here have talked about is that the what might happen, there's good and there's bad. And it's not two sides of the same coin. It's not that you have one or the other. You can have both. You can have multiple effects. And neither of these standards really help the decision makers understand how to weigh all the potential consequences, the good and the bad, the likelihood of each one of them being different, perhaps occurring at different times, to be able to make a rational, thoughtful decision. So I'm disappointed by both. I think I still lean towards ISO, but frankly, my advice these days is to do what works for you and to help you understand what might happen and how are you going to achieve objectives and deliver value to your stakeholders. As I wrote in my last one of my last blogs, it's not about managing risk, it's about managing the organization for success.
That's a really good point, Norman. And I wanted to let everybody know, well, a couple things. One is if they're not following your writing and blogs on LinkedIn or on your blog site, they absolutely should. Also, at the conclusion of this conversation, we're going to ask the same question about which of these frameworks you prefer, because I'm curious if anybody's mind changes as they hear from our experts their opinion about how these frameworks can, or if they can, help you with regard to decision making in your organization. So Tim, same question. Decision making is central to risk management. Do either of these frameworks really help in this area?
Okay, Scott, thanks for the opportunity. Just a point of technical clarification. The poll was asking which of the two frameworks I've read, and it only gave me the opportunity to say one of them. I think it's fair to say all the panelists have read both, and probably in far more detail than normal people. I think all of us, because the three panelists are focused on this area, we really read these things and think about them at a different level. What I like about the COSO framework was that it really elevated the notion of strategy and linking risk management to performance, and that's the reason that in the write-up it says I've publicly said I liked COSO. I think both of them suffer from being written for specialists as opposed to being written to really try and sway the views and acceptance of board members and C-suite about whether risk management is something that they should know and learn about. And I don't think either of them have done a great job. I think the fact that COSO took the decision to change the title of the 2017 report with more focus. I've gone so far in my practice, I'm talking now about strategy and value oversight as being the primary purpose. And I think titling is actually quite important if you're going to get the attention of key decision makers. I believe the majority of C-suite and board members still think of risk management as hazard management. That's based on what I get when I talk to them. So many of them I talk with, when I first suggest risk management, they say we have people that deal with that. Well, as long as C-suites and boards think risk management is something that you hire people to deal with it, they've missed the fundamental point that risk management is something we all do. And it's a decision the board and the C-suite makes is the level of rigor that you're going to use when you're making decisions. Because risk management in its most distilled form is the application of structured rigor to what we all do anyway. And I don't believe that either of those actually does a great job communicating what really needs to be communicated if the objective is the buy-in of the C-suite and boards. And For those of you that are interested, if you go to LinkedIn and you connect with me on LinkedIn, I've set up a new group called Strategy and Value Oversight. And the primary purpose is to reposition the whole initiative of formal risk and internal audit as a process that applies more structured rigor, and you should make a conscious decision on how much rigor you want to apply, and that decision should be made by the C-suite and the board. So these are the ideas we're promoting in this new group, but it is heavily linked to the need to reposition the profession as a structured process that you can use at different levels of rigor to make better decisions. So that's my primary philosophy of them. This is the other. I lean towards COSO, but by the same token, it's a 200-page document, and I like the ISO for the simplicity. So there's things I like about both frameworks, and I think that's really what people need to do, is take the best out of the two of them if they have the stomach to chew through COSO, which is 200 plus. Alex?
Yep, thank you. Well, I guess I wanted to take this question in a slightly different direction. And again, my opinion that it's probably unfair to look at ISO 31000 or COSO ERM 2017 for guidance on how to integrate into decision making and for like specific details. Those documents are designed for something entirely different. They're marketing pieces at best. And as far as marketing is concerned, ISO and COSO have both done a good enough job mentioning the right keywords, so any good risk manager who knows the answer, who knows how to integrate into the decision making, can then take it and sell it internally to their CFOs, procurement officers, internal auditors, CEOs, and the board members. So both documents have done a lot of good things inside. I personally obviously steer towards ISO because if it's a marketing document, 14 pages is more than enough for a marketing document. You didn't have to write 257 pages that PwC did for COSO for just the objective of having a piece of paper that you can kind of put to the side and protect yourself, saying, it's not me who wants to integrate into decision making. It's not me who wants to change how you do investment planning and how you do budgeting and how you do strategic planning or procurement. It says so in an official, respectable, and trustworthy document. So both have done good steps to help us risk managers who know how to do it to properly sell it internally. And I mean, none of the that being said, both have done enough to act as a marketing document. None have done enough to act as a proper guidance for how to integrate into decision making. However, I don't think that was the initial objective with ISO 31000 to begin with. So it's very difficult to blame them for not doing something they never intended to do. I certainly blame COSO for not doing enough, because 257 pages, I mean, that's like a full textbook, and it's all fluff. Like, there's no detail whatsoever. Even the risk profile concept that they created for the purposes of this document is either a complete rubbish or just a kind of turned upside down Monte Carlo simulation, which you can't tell because they don't give you any detail. It's so high level. So risk managers, really, if they're looking for answers on how to integrate, they should like read proper decision-making books, like the Foundations of Decision Analysis by one of the Stanford's professors, which is, by the way, probably one of the best books on integrating risk into decision analysis out there, as well as Carl Spitzer Decision Quality, that kind of goes further investigating this topic. So as far as standards are concerned, I think both have done a good enough job in terms of marketing and helping us sell risk management because it's an official, it's high profile document. Both have a lot of very silly things. For example, even ISO, as much as I like it, still has the notion that risks have to be measured in terms of likelihood and consequence, which of course is total nonsense for many risks when you integrate into decision making. And to use them for something other than just purely sales pitch, I think is naive, because there is a lot of proper guidance for the risk managers. It's not like risk managers don't have access to information. All of this stuff has been written for years. I mean, the foundations of decision analysis, I think it has like 4th edition, which was published in 2015. This stuff has been around for years. It's just and hopefully this is what our discussion / debate brings today, is that it triggers in the participant's mind the desire to go and Google proper research on decision making, on corporate finance, on integrating into budgeting, strategic planning, the statistics, the quantification. There's a lot of individual pieces of information.
Yes, those, I mean, a lot of differing perspectives, but also some consistency where, as Tim mentioned, as experts, we all and scrutinize them more than the average person. And with all that scrutiny, it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, it's, Alex, you were mentioning that these are more like marketing documents, and in that way, having something shorter and punchier, in ISO might be more useful. Tim, I think you brought out a good point, which is boards and senior management are already paying attention to COSO. And do you remember what's the title of the update again? It's about integrating risk and strategy, I think.
And performance.
Yeah. So, having the attention of boards in senior management, certainly in the United States or any U.S. registered organization is obviously dealing with COSO, can provide a nice, wedge to at least start a discussion. Alex, your point about a 250-page document for that is well taken. And also the point, Norman, just about, well, what is decision making? What are you making decisions about? And I think that it's certainly no longer debatable, if you will. I don't think there's anybody in our field or dealing with risk that wouldn't agree with the following statement, is that risk is obviously about upside and downside, right? And the question is, how often is this really being done in organization? You could open up the poll about this. I'm kind of curious with the participants. At your organization, are you all looking at, gain as well as loss, risk and reward as you're factoring or as you're going through the decision-making process? I'm curious just, to get a pulse with the audience. And I should note again, audience, we're going to be emailing the results of all of these polls as part of the follow-up. So you'll get all the results of this and the change your mind aspect of this. But I wanted to also kick this to the panel, that if risk is about upside downside decision making, all of you are working with dozens, if not hundreds of organizations. And maybe we could just focus on the last couple years, not 10 years ago, but today, currently. How often do you see this upside downside being factored into decision making at the organization? Tim, could you start off?
Sure, Scott. You told me not to go back a long ways, but I really have to. The philosophy that I've promoted through my whole career is we style it now as objective-centric enterprise risk management. And ever since I started in Gulf Canada implementing a form of what the framework is today, I wanted it to be objective-centric, and I wanted it to be about the most important objectives that would drive long-term success of the corporation, but also objectives that if you don't do them at least reasonably well, you can drag your organization into the ditch and even into, in extreme cases, receivership, like we're seeing in Britain right now with Carillion, and we've seen massive governance failures in America. When you practice enterprise risk and you start with the most important objectives to success and to also avoiding failure, it just naturally causes people to think that risk management is about upside as well as avoiding downside. And it's that balance that I think many of the organizations in the world have implemented enterprise risk using risk registers. And a lot of times it's a survey that goes around and fundamentally asks what are the bad things that could happen that would hurt us. And that approach has caused a large percentage of boards and senior executives to equate enterprise risk management with hazard management. And it has really done the whole profession a disservice. And as soon as you elevate it and you make ERM about the long-term achievement of really important value creation objectives, the most important critical strategic objectives of the organization, all of a sudden you have engagement of the real decision makers in the process. So I think the widespread practice of risk registers has really hurt the profession badly, far more than I can even articulate. When COSO issued the 2016 exposure draft, I actually, in my response, accused them of being schizophrenic. I said it would appear half of the group that's authoring this document is risk-centric and likes risk registers and heat maps and those kind of approaches, and the rest of the author team wants to try and drag the world towards the real purpose of risk management, which is managing uncertainty to really important objectives that warrant more rigorous thinking. So the upside, there's a lot of talk about the upside and the downside. Well, as long as you don't make enterprise risk objective-centric and you launch into it with what are the bad things that we should worry about, risk management, as interpreted by most of the most important people at the board and C-suite level, they're going to see the profession as being pigeonholed into hazard management. And until we get out of that pigeonhole, and I hard with strategy and value oversight and promoting ERM programs that focus on the top value creation objectives. So that's my view. Fortunately, COSO, when they did the final 2017, the schizophrenic team leaned a little bit more. That was enough to make me happy as a pragmatist, but not as an idealist, that they brought it more towards a process that should look at the most important value creation as well as preservation objectives. A process that should look at the most important value creation as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. It's, I'm actually worried, Alex, I was going to kick this to you next, and Tim, you uttered the phrase risk register, which, Alex, I think it's probably triggered at this point. So, Alex, what are your thoughts? Alex, I think it's probably triggered at this point. So, Alex, what are your thoughts?
Well, to actually pick up on Tim's point and to continue it, I totally agree with with everything he said. As I always do, I try to take it a step further, because yes, risk registers are a complete waste of time, and yes, they are fundamentally flawed in both methodology, and they don't account for the the way human nature works and the cognitive biases impact on the risk discussion. Coming back to your question though, do companies in the recent kind of examples, do companies look at both the upside and the downside risks or the effect of uncertainty when making decisions? Now, I I agree. It has to be, objective centric or decision centric, whatever you call it. That's a given. I think the difference between me and the other panelists is that I think to do a good job, not just talking about risks is not good enough, because the decisions and the objectives that the companies are currently and the environment in which the companies are operating is now becoming so more complex and interconnected and just unpredictable, that having or using our brain capacity as the only decision-making tool is simply not good enough. Not only we are subject to over 250 cognitive biases, but also we just don't have I believe we don't have the capacity to process the information at the speed and at the complexity level required to make actual big business decisions. It will probably work for like smaller decisions, maybe procurement decisions. They're not that complex, but like strategic investment decisions, budgetary decisions, all the big big ticket items, they require something more than just talking about risk. And that's where the irony comes in, is that many risk managers, actually I should rephrase that, very few of the risk managers that I know, but there are some, and there are pockets of some amazing experience all over the world. Interestingly, it's not specific to any geography. Even in US, which is going to sound fun because you guys all, even in US, which is generally less mature in terms of risk than Australia, for example. Not my words. The North Carolina Institute survey year after year shows that. If you trust their survey, which I know I don't. But the irony is that the few risk managers, the few good pockets of risk expertise that I've met all over the world, they actually use tools. They use different tools that don't rely on just subjective discussions and opinions, and they try to use data and modeling, forecasting, scenarios, sensitivity, decision trees to capture some of that uncertainty. Well, the irony is that all of those tools that I've just mentioned, decision trees, scenarios, sensitivity analysis, Monte Carlo simulations, these basic tools all simultaneously don't produce a single value output. They produce a range of scenarios. And the only difference is that some produce 2 or 3 scenarios, other tools produce 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 scenarios. So we've had, again, like these tools have been around for more than 50 years. We've had the tools that actually allow us to see the full effect uncertainty has on a specific decision or a specific objective. So for example, when the last project I did, I modeled risks for a toll road in Brazil, I think, or somewhere in Latin America. And the conclusion was, interestingly, the conclusion was the pricing that you have for this investment project is fair. You could have done better, and this is by how much you could have done better. However, the pricing could have, you also have a good upside if things go well, and these are the factors, these are the assumptions that you need to closely monitor, that you need to document in the legal agreement with the party that you're building this investment project together with. These are the things you need to transfer to the local government to increase the chances of success on the project or exceeding the objective that the management set for themselves. So I've just described to you the results of like proper risk analysis without mentioning the word risk even once. And the tools, and again, this is just, I think, the final point that I'm going to make on this. Yes, we should look at both the upside and downside, and it's not that difficult. There's nothing new about it. There's nothing unique in our approach, because all the proper tools have given us both the upside and downside simultaneously in a single graph. It's called distribution range, and it shows you the full picture. So yes, risk management has that wonderful potential to show the full picture.
Yeah, All good points. Like I said, I knew that the whole risk register thing would trigger you, Alex, based on the videos of yours that I've seen. And Norman, I mean, this is something, I feel like you and I have discussed this over the years. This, you know, it's one of those things, I think, the upside, downside, everybody agrees in spirit. And, you know, the question is, how do we, you know, bring that into the organization, and especially within, you know, the roles of many people in our audience? What's your perspective on this whole concept?
Thank you, Scott. And Tim and Alex, as usual, have made some very good points. I want to take it back for a minute and say, what are we trying to do here? What is the objective of all of these practitioners, all of the executives, all of the board members? They're trying to run the organization. They're trying to have informed, intelligent running of the organization. Informed and intelligent, okay? Now, I'm going to see if I can use plain English, which I've been advocating for a while now, instead of these technical words like the R word or this other word which has now started becoming into our conversation, the debate, uncertainty, because that, again, is a word that not everybody understands the same way. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to understand what might happen, and those are both upside and downside, good and bad. You're spending money, you're putting money at risk to achieve objectives, but to deliver value, but other things can happen, and as Alex said, you've got a range of possibilities, but it's not just one chart. It's those which have to be overlaid on top of each other, because you can have compliance issues, you can have cyber issues, you have revenue issues, you have customer satisfaction opportunities, you have all these things that can happen, and some are good and some are bad, and you have to figure out how to weigh all of them in order to make an informed and intelligent decision. I agree 100% with Alex that there are tools and techniques out there which can be deployed by the strategy department or the R department to help with this. But you have to look at everything, just like we do when we're deciding whether to buy this car or that car, when to cross the road. We have to consider all the things that might happen. And the best information that we can gather, the most sources and perspectives we can get from different people, will help us to do that. So does this happen in practice? I think it does sometimes. I think if you take some of the major decisions that an organization will make, such as whether to acquire another company, whether to go forward with the implementation of a new computer system, even though perhaps the information security people are saying they're not quite secure. All of those are judgment decisions which can be informed by practitioners and tools and information and different perspectives so that they can be made in an intelligent fashion. So I think that happens with some of the large ones, but it's not only the large ones that can cause an organization to either fail or succeed. As I mentioned before, some of these things with Michael Cohen, or the Amazon acquisition of Whole Foods, where they didn't necessarily think through how the Amazon culture could affect the operations of Whole Food. It's not always happening. And if you get down into some of the decisions, for example, at the roots of the Deepwater Horizon BP disaster, those were decisions that were made by people fairly low level in the organization. So I think that, yes, it is done fairly often for the large and obvious significant decisions. But decisions are being made all across the organization at all different levels. And how often do we say to somebody, what were you thinking? You weren't thinking. And that means that they really didn't go through an appropriate, disciplined, thoughtful process before they made that decision. And that is where I think the value of our practitioners and this whole idea of decision science comes in, let alone application of the R word and principles and techniques, is helping people make better decisions. Oh, and by the way, risk registers or lists of what might happen do have value. They don't necessarily drive very many decisions, but one of the things that they do allow us to do is step back and think about just where we are today. And we may have multiple situations, multiple things that might happen, which can affect the achievement of multiple objectives. So it's useful to take both approaches. The objective base, as Tim has appropriately focused on, and I think the Sanders and people like myself have, and Alex have focused on for a decade or two. You need to do the objective top down, but you also need to be thinking about what might happen, and then how would that affect all the different objectives I have. So yes, it does happen. It doesn't happen as often as it should, and sometimes it's as simple as training people some basic principles in terms of how do you make informed, intelligent decisions, whether it's to hire this person versus that person, whether to set the sales price of a new product at this level or that level, whether to go forward with spending so much money on marketing or not. All of these are decisions which can have a significant effect, but they're frequently not given the kind of attention that Monte Carlo simulation or some of these models can help you with.
Yeah, maybe I'll come to the rescue of risk registers just for a second and take the other side of it. I think in general I agree with almost everything that's been said, insofar as there's certainly not enough. But, and Norman, maybe this is exactly the point you were just making, but I'll try to be extreme on making it, is that risk registers can certainly be a helpful enumerated list of things to think about. In other words, it can certainly be a starting point to say, well, these are at least some of the downside items that I need to factor into my decision making. And so while they don't actually help you, make the decision, it's a starting point. I mean, it's kind of like, I feel like checklists also get a bad rap. A lot of times people say, oh gosh, this particular program that's been put in place is just a check the box program. It's like, well, checklists can actually be real helpful. Pilots use them. And by the way, the government has a checklist when they come in to investigate you. So it's kind of good if you can check boxes in certain places. It's rarely enough, a checklist won't actually or shouldn't actually comprise the full complement of management actions you take to address a particular risk. But it's not a terrible starting point in my opinion. And, it's maybe we think about it so much and we think about, well, what needs to happen going forward that, after you see all the things you need to do after the risk register, you look back at it and say, well, that really wasn't, it wasn't enough, or it was so incomplete that that might be the source of why we give it such a bad rap.
Well, Scott, with all due respect, I have to take violent disagreement with you. I think risk registers have done unbelievable harm. If you take a risk and to a single risk and stick it in a risk register, and that risk relates to one or more objectives, and then you start making decisions on the single risk, and most objectives have at least 10 significant risks, I would suggest the risk register actually is a vehicle that is actually encouraging widespread flawed decision making, in addition to communicating that risk management is fundamentally about managing bad things that could happen, which has denigrated the profession. I'm dealing with a major organization right now, and I talk to many of the readers of my polls, and when they talk to their C-suite and the board, and they're trying to convince them to use enterprise risk for really important strategic objectives, and they're getting kickback saying, well, what's that got to do with risk management? And that view has been shaped by a decade of being exposed to risk registers. The most important people that drive the vision of these companies, they see see risk management as risk registers, nothing to do with important strategy. So I have to take violent disagreement that, gee whiz, they're not a bad way to pass the time.
Okay.
As risk registers, nothing to do with important strategy. So I have to take violent disagreement that, gee whiz, they're not a bad way to pass the time.
I have an interesting perspective, if I may, very quickly on this. First, obviously, agree with Tim. I would be very reluctant to use risk registers as even any form of starting point. That being said, however, I think I have an interesting perspective on putting it. Is that there is a very big difference between what I call risk management 1, which is risk management for someone else, and risk management 2, which is risk management for the actual decision makers within the company. And the reality is that historically, the risk professionals have been spending most of their time on risk management 1 type activities. So having an enterprise-wide risk register is a risk management 1, RM1 type activity. It doesn't actually drive the decision making within the company. Most decision makers couldn't care less what's inside the risk register, but it takes up a lot of time to do the interviews, do the workshops, collate, get the feedback, get the mitigation plans, and risk owners, and all the other nonsense that is associated with that. That being said, RM1 is not going to go away anywhere because the board members are continuing to ask it. Stock exchanges will continue to ask for it. Credit rating agencies, banks who give you finance, insurance companies, literally most of the regulators, the ministries, most of the external world will continue asking for risk appetite statements, risk management framework documents, risk registers, heat maps, risk reports. All of those things have nothing to do with the actual risk-based decision making, if I can, or informed risk taking, if we're kind of using the better terminology. But however, we still have to kind of do it. I think the challenge for the modern day risk managers is to come up with ways to not spend too much time on RM1 type activities. You really shouldn't be spending more than 10% of your time throughout the year on doing these documents that are only necessary for compliance purposes to show an auditor, an external auditor once a year, or show your credit rating agency once a year. And they should be spending 90% of their time on the actual decision-making type problems, the RM2 problems, where they integrate into whatever procurement, planning, budgeting, operational, whatever the important investment, whatever the important decisions are for your type of business, that's where they should be spending most of the time. So it's really difficult to debate one or the other. And I did a conference in Sweden recently where I used the matrix analogy. You have to choose, red pill or blue pill. Well, that's actually not true. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of choosing one or the other. We have to continue to pretend to play along and do all these silly documents that have no relation to the actual decision making because somebody asks for them. So for me, it's RM1 and RM2, but we should be heavily spending on integration into decision making and spending less time on this profanity.
Are used because they become just a list of risks. And if it's just a list of, oh my goodness, I actually used that profanity word, R word. If it's just a list of those bad things that can happen, I agree it's not as useful as it can be. It is something that should be taken into account. But let's think about this for a minute. The thing that's missing from most of these lists is how it affects the different objectives. And the aggregate effect on multiple objectives can be something that needs to be taken care of. And that's the thing that is missing in practice from these registers. So, for example, if I think about what might happen if my car broke down, okay? Well, that could affect multiple things. It could affect my cash flow. It could affect my ability to go to exercise, go to play. Obviously, I don't go to work very often anymore because I'm retired. But it affects multiple things. Now, each one of those individually may be something that its effect on that individual objective is not significant. But overall, I need to do something because I don't want, because the individual harm or I'm willing to, let's put it another way, I'm willing to spend some money to avoid having that combination of bad things happen. So I think it's useful, but you do need to make it into something that's much more actionable in terms of strategy and achievement of objective delivery of value. By taking it to the next step and saying, okay, we've got this bottoms-up list, which is what it is. It's a bottoms-up list of things that might happen. Now, what are the top things that could be affected by that? Now, let's pull those all together and say, in aggregate, is this something that I want to spend money to avoid or to enhance? Is there something where I need to be changing individual strategies? In other words, drive some kind of decision-making. But it's got to be linked to the objectives and strategies of the organization, not just managing risk rather than, I'll use that word again. I apologize to everybody for my bad language, rather than managing the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us would agree. Going back, Tim, I love your violent disagreement. I think Alex, you disagreed with my statement as well, but then did I think say 10% of your time might be on that, and I think Norman, you hit my sentiment probably better than I did, which is, yeah, it really depends on what that thing is, and yeah, Tim, I think at least my sense is that your violent disagreement is how these things are typically developed and typically used, which is fair, by the way. It's fair to say the reason why you disagree so violently has to do with its typical use. But, just because, we're suggesting all kinds of things right now about the profession and risk management and decision making. And perhaps there is a better way to use, risk registers in the future. And there's a right balance of how much time you spend on such a deliverable. Well, look, the hour, it's almost an hour, and I wanted to make sure that each of you had a moment to give some closing thoughts on this topic generally. What I wanted to do as folks are giving their closing thoughts, Melissa, is to open the final poll. I don't know that we debated COSO versus ISO as much on this one. Maybe we'll have to do a repeat here where we have a much more specific proposition. But Melissa, I am curious if just, based on some of the things that we've talked about, if people's minds have changed at all. And as I mentioned, I'll be following up with all of you attending to give you the answers. So you're probably as curious as I am. To what degree do people's minds change after these things? So as you're answering this final poll, I wanted to, again, just kind of kick this to everyone for a final thought, starting, Norman, with you.
I think we need to come back and refocus on helping the leaders of the organization at all levels run the business efficiently and effectively to deliver value to our stakeholders. And what does each party here, whether it be compliance, our management, internal audit, information security, whatever, what is their role in doing that, and how can they help people make better, more informed, more intelligent decisions? Come back to that over and over. Are you doing enough?
Tim, what are your thoughts on just this, if you reflect on the conversation a bit?
Well, I'd like to bring in a little different element. One of the books that I'm really, and philosophies, is a book by the name of Daniel Kahneman, and Alex has been a big promoter of them, and a lot of the people I've dealt with have been influenced by his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I believe that it actually has a huge amount to do with the world's acceptance of formal risk management. Everybody manages risk, and when you read Kahneman's book, you begin to really understand that people, a lot of senior executives and even standards fast. And there's a reason that you need to do that. A lot of times in life you have to. The point, though, in his thesis, which he won the Nobel Prize for, is when do we need to think slow? And when he means slow, he doesn't mean slow as in a retarded way. He means slow as in a more structured, rigorous way, or in Alex's word, he likes the word proper. When do you decide to bring in more rigor to your decision making? And risk management should be all about decision making, in spite of what risk registers have done to ruin that. And if you think about what Kahneman's saying, you begin to start to understand. And another book I'm reading right now is Strategy Beyond the Hockey Stick, that talks about how so many of the world's corporations bring strategies to boards, and they haven't moved from fast to slow in a granular enough way to really think about the risks and things that could impact strategy. But the book explains why the game is being played to game that. And it's not clear that a lot of the strategy processes actually have wanted to bring much rigor to the board in terms of thinking about scenarios and things. So these are important things, I think, and where the profession needs to go. So I think those are concepts I'm busy trying to build into our strategy and value oversight methodologies.
How about you, Norman? I'm sorry, how about you, Alex?
To our strategy and value oversight methodologies.
How about you, Norman? I'm sorry, how about you, Alex?
I totally agree. I totally agree. I think we're realizing that the risk management hasn't really, in many cases, I mean, I'm sure there are some exceptions all over the world, some gems, but in majority cases, risk management hasn't really proven or delivered that much value to the business bottom line. And we are at the turning point in our careers where we're trying to investigate, well, what else, what different can we do if doing a quarterly risk report or a risk register, a heat map, doesn't change the way a company makes, multi-billion-dollar investment decisions. If that doesn't work, what is there to investigate? And the biggest takeaway for me is that we're kind of, it's always fashionable to be the creators and the first explorers and lead the world. I'm not sure we as risk managers, have that luxury, because most of the things have been discovered, tested, and documented for years. And we are unlucky in the way that there's very little, until we kind of move into the artificial intelligence area, there's very little we can create uniquely different. But the good news is most answers, most tools, most methodologies that risk managers need to do their job properly, to integrate into decision making, have all been documented. So there's a good book on literally most of the aspects that risk managers need to have in their toolkit. There are books on decision quality that talk about integrating risk analysis. There are books on quantitative analysis and quantifying uncertainty and modeling different risk scenarios. And if 50 years ago, when this theory was just being developed, only large corporations with huge budgets could afford to model risk. Well, now my tablet has more processing power than is necessary to model risks on any typical budget or an investment decision or even a strategic decision. And the software used for risk modeling, it used to cost a lot. Now there are free options. I mean, just Google free risk modeling software, and there are amazing tools that allow us to add all that functionality to existing, Microsoft projects, Primaveras, Excels that we use for decision makers. So for me, the key takeaway is, I think it's a turning point for us to mentally realize that we need to start looking outside of just pure risk management scope, because there is a lot more information on the boundaries of risk management profession in decision making, in statistics, in change management, in negotiations, in communications, in behavioral sciences, in neuroeconomics. All of these areas have,
Thanks,
I
Alex, for
believe,
that
at
perspective.
least
And
for
I
the
wanted to
moment,
give my
until
own
somebody
kind
proves
of
me wrong,
closing thought
I
on
believe we
this,
have all
and
the answers
perhaps this is
necessary to do
telegraphing where the
an
part three
amazing,
will go
risk
on this.
management job.
But is if we assume, and I think we all agree, that this risk management business should be about helping the organization, the entity, achieve success in some way, achieve its objectives. And Alex, you were listing off a number of just sort of competencies and skills that individuals should have. And today's focus has been around decision making. But all of that said, I think, especially for the audience on the line, and for a lot of the people we serve with our members, our experts here at on the panel serve, and their clients, and the people we all just kind of hang out with, our colleagues from the last 2 decades, is what unique aspect can we bring to the table? In other words, decision making is an all-purpose skill. Everyone in every role is going to have to do some form of decision making. And so then the question is, people who are in, say, compliance or audit or a formally defined risk management function, how ought we deliver unique value to the organization that, say, the other executives are not? And what I'll leave, to me, is this analogy. We used this this saying many years ago at OSEG. The fastest cars need the best brakes. That, or if we use a sports metaphor, which I don't always like doing, but if you think about it, in most sports you have offense and defense. And while both the offense and the defense are trying to achieve objectives, win the game, they do have different roles to play. And if we're talking about soccer or footballers, right, there's still ball handling skills and being able to, use your feet properly and bring those correct techniques. But there are still unique techniques that each of the players bring to the field. And what I wonder is if in this risk management business, in an effort for us to find and discover some of the universal skills, in the analogy, the ball handling skills, which today would be decision-making skills and whatnot, are we losing a little bit of ourselves and our purpose of being on the field or being in the organization and the unique thing we can bring to the table? So I think despite everything that we've discussed today, I do encourage the audience and everybody to really think about the uniqueness they can bring to their organization in using these skills, using what they know and learn about decision making from all these great sources that the panels brought in today's discussion. So panel, thank you so much for the discussion today, and thank you for the attendees for joining us, and I look forward to part 3 of this series. Thank you.